High on a hill on the California coast, halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco, there is a palace with 165 rooms. It has 2 swimming pools. One of them is lined with tiles made of real gold. It once held the largest private art collection ever assembled by a single human being on Earth. And the family whose name is carved above the gate cannot sleep there. Not for one night. If they want to walk through the front hall their grandfather built, they buy a ticket. They stand in the same line as the tourists. They ride the same bus up the hill. His name was William Randolph Hearst, and in the 1930s he was arguably the most powerful private citizen in the United States. He owned 28 major newspapers. He owned magazines, radio stations, a movie studio. On any given morning, 1 in every 4 Americans was reading words that came out of his machine. He built the house on that hill over 28 years, on a ranch the size of a small country, and he filled it with the treasures of Europe. Today, his descendants own almost none of it. The house is not theirs. The gold-tiled pool is not theirs. The state of California owns the crown jewel of the Hearst name and lets strangers wander through it for the price of a movie ticket. So how does a family build the most famous private home in America and then lose the right to set foot in it as anything but a paying guest? The answer is not a stock market crash. It is not a scandal or a swindle or a fire in the night. It is something quieter and stranger than any of that. And here is the part almost nobody tells you. In the end, giving that castle away might have been the smartest thing this family ever did, because a house like that is not really a home. It is a machine for burning money. Hold that thought, because to understand how the Hearsts lost the castle, you first have to understand a hill that used to be a campsite. The land came before the money, or rather it came before this money. In 1865, a rough, self-made mining man named George Hearst bought 40,000 acres of California coastline near a little bay called San Simeon. George was the real thing, a prospector who had struck it enormous, with a hand in some of the richest silver and copper mines in the American West. He later bought his way into the United States Senate, and on that stretch of empty coast he and his family would come to camp. That is the word people forget. Camp. The most opulent private estate in America began as a place to pitch a tent. George's only son was named William, and William did not want the mines. He wanted words. In 1887, his father handed him a struggling little newspaper in San Francisco called The Examiner, probably expecting the boy to lose interest. The boy did not lose interest. He rebuilt it, splashed it with huge headlines and screaming scandal and crusades against the powerful, and it sold. Then he took that formula to New York and to Chicago and to Boston and to Los Angeles, until he had stitched together the first true coast-to-coast newspaper empire the country had ever seen. That empire is the engine of this whole story, so let me be plain about what it was. It was a money machine. Every morning it printed papers, sold them, sold the advertising around them, and turned that into cash. As long as the machine ran, the cash kept coming. Remember the machine. We are going to watch it nearly die now. In 1919, William's mother, Phoebe Apperson Hearst, died in the great influenza epidemic, and William inherited the ranch at San Simeon. By then it had grown from George's original 40,000 acres into something staggering, around 250,000 acres. That is nearly 400 square miles. That is close to the size of the entire city of Los Angeles, owned by one man, running along the ocean. He was 56 years old. He was rich, famous, and restless. And he was tired of camping. So he walked into the San Francisco office of an architect named Julia Morgan. Morgan was a quiet, brilliant woman, one of the first women ever licensed to practice architecture in California, in an era when the field simply did not admit women. Hearst told her, and this is close to his real words, that he was tired of camping out at the ranch and he would like to build a little something. A little something. Sit with that phrase for a moment, because what they built on that hill would take the rest of both their lives. They called it La Cuesta Encantada, the Enchanted Hill. For 28 years, Julia Morgan spent her weekends riding the train down the coast to a construction site perched above the Pacific. Every board, every bag of cement, every marble statue had to be shipped to the little dock at San Simeon and hauled up a steep dirt road to the top. Hearst thought it would take about 2 years. Instead, it never truly stopped. As long as he had money, there was always another wing, another tower, another terrace to tear out and rebuild, because he had changed his mind. And what rose out of the hill was almost hard to believe. The main house alone, Casa Grande, had dozens of bedrooms and bathrooms and grand rooms under towers built to look like a Spanish cathedral. Across the estate, more than 160 rooms, an outdoor pool, the Neptune Pool, ringed with marble columns and a real ancient temple front, water so blue it looked painted. And below the tennis courts, an indoor pool, the Roman Pool, its walls and ceiling covered in tiny tiles of cobalt blue and hammered gold, some of them made with real gold leaf. There were gardens with hundreds of thousands of trees carried up that hill and planted. There was the largest private zoo in the world, with zebras and camels and big cats roaming the hillside. And there were the guests. This is where the legend really lives. On any given weekend in the 1930s, the guest list at San Simeon might include Charlie Chaplin, Cary Grant, the biggest stars in Hollywood, senators, kings in exile, and Hearst's longtime companion, the actress Marion Davies. Winston Churchill himself came to stay, and Churchill, in a private letter, left us maybe the most useful description of Hearst ever written. He called him a grave, simple child playing with the most costly toys. A vast income, Churchill wrote, always overspent, always overspent. Remember that line. It is the whole story in 3 words, because here is what the estate really was. At his peak in the middle of the 1930s, Hearst's fortune looked bottomless. The empire ran 28 major newspapers and a wall of magazines and radio stations, and reached something like 20 million readers a day. And Hearst spent like the money would never end. His personal spending at its height ran to around $15 million a year. In the 1930s, in the middle of the Great Depression, he bought art the way other men buy groceries. Compulsively, constantly by the crate. He owned so much of it that most of it never even reached the castle. It sat cataloged in warehouses. 4 in California and 1 in the Bronx, a 5-story building that took up an entire city block, stuffed floor to ceiling with tapestries and armor and statues and stained glass he had bought and would never see again. Think about what that actually means. The most beautiful house in America was not even big enough to hold what its owner had bought. The overflow filled a warehouse the size of a city block 3,000 miles away. So picture it. The Enchanted Hill at full height, the gold pool, the zoo, the movie stars, the towers against the sunset, the richest ranch in California, and the man in the bedroom at the top who had, in his own words, everything. It looked like the safest fortune in the world. It was already running dry, and that is the part nobody standing on that hill could see. Here is a myth worth clearing up because you have almost certainly heard it. The story people tell is that the Great Depression destroyed William Randolph Hearst, that the crash of 1929 came for everyone, and the great man was simply one more victim of hard times. That is not what happened. Not really. The Depression did not build the trap Hearst fell into. Hearst built it brick by brick for years, The depression just walked in and pulled the cover off, because the fortune that looked bottomless was not bottomless. It was borrowed. For decades, Hearst had been running his empire on a simple, dangerous idea. That debt was not a warning sign. Debt was the magic ingredient. Debt was the thing that let him buy the newspapers and the art and build the castles without ever having to stop and ask whether the machine underneath could actually pay for it. As long as the papers sold and the money came in, he could keep borrowing against tomorrow to pay for today. But he broke his own machine in two ways at once. First, he never stopped spending. He refused to sell a single property. He refused to cut salaries. He refused, on principle, to shrink. Second, he fed the wrong thing. He poured the empire's cash into monuments, the castle, the art, a second castle in Wales, a Bavarian-style village he was building at another estate called Wintoun. Beautiful things, things that produced nothing, things that only ate. And that is the flaw at the center of this entire story. He kept building the monuments and starving the engine. The house was not the reward for the fortune. The house was the thing, quietly draining it. Now the depression arrives. Advertising collapses. Newspapers stop selling. The money coming into the machine drops hard. But the debts do not drop. The castle does not stop demanding. The warehouse full of art does not pay rent. And suddenly the man with everything cannot cover what he owes. For a while, he simply refused to believe it. He was 70 years old. He had been one of the richest men alive for his entire adult life. Imagine being told at 70 that the ground under all of it was gone. He did not want to hear it, but the numbers did not care what he wanted to hear. And by 1937, the numbers had come due. The reckoning arrived in a single, brutal figure. By 1937, the two companies at the heart of Hearst's empire were $126 million in debt. Let me translate that. In today's money, that is well over $2 billion. The most powerful private citizen in America was functionally broke. Worse than broke. He owed more than he could ever pay, and the banks holding those notes were done waiting. So in June of that year, William Randolph Hearst, who had answered to no one for half a century, got on a train to New York and signed away control of his own empire. A group of trustees was formed to try to save what was left. They called it the Conservation Committee. 7 men. And at their head was a lawyer and former judge named Clarence Shern, an old associate of Hearst's who had by then gone to work for the very banks Hearst owed money to. For the first time in 50 years, the chief was not the boss. And now the collapse comes, not all at once, but in stages, each one a little more humiliating than the last. The committee did what Hearst never could. They started cutting. They halted construction at San Simeon and at Wintoun, the work that had kept hundreds of craftsmen busy for years. They slashed his allowance, and in one of the strangest details of the whole affair, they made William Randolph Hearst pay rent to stay in his own houses. The man who built the castle now had to be billed for the privilege of sleeping in it. Then they came for the art. From 1938 onward, the Great Collection, the one so vast it filled a warehouse the size of a city block, was cataloged and put up for sale, and it did not sell fast enough. There was simply too much of it, and a nervous, depression-weary world was not buying. One of Hearst's own advisors described the problem perfectly. Trying to sell it all at auction, he said, would be like emptying an oil tanker with an eyedropper. So they found another way. And this is the image I want you to hold on to. In 1941, the treasures of the Enchanted Hill went on sale on the 5th floor of Gimbel's department store in Midtown Manhattan, right next to Penn Station. The armor and the tapestries and the old master paintings, the things Hearst had spent a lifetime and a fortune chasing across Europe, were laid out between the housewares and the coats under advertisements that read, and I am not making this up, New York City art at clearance. The greatest private collection ever assembled, marked down and sold off the department store floor. About half of it went that way. The rest of the estate went with it. The zoo was broken up. The exotic animals shipped off to zoos around the country. Staff who had worked on that hill for years were let go. Hearst even sold off some of his own newspapers, the very machine, to feed the debt. And then, in that same year, 1941, came the final humiliation, the one that had nothing to do with money at all. A young filmmaker named Orson Welles released a movie called Citizen Kane. It told the story of a fictional newspaper baron, fabulously rich, endlessly lonely, dying in a cavernous, half-empty palace he called Xanadu, surrounded by crates of art he never opened. Everyone knew exactly who it was about. Hearst tried to bury the film. He failed. And so, at the lowest moment of his life, the whole country got to watch a version of his own tragedy play out on a screen. He hung on. He even clawed back a measure of control before the end, because the war years finally brought the advertising money back and the machine started to pay again. But he was old now and tired, and his health was failing. In 1947, William Randolph Hearst rode down that steep dirt road from La Cuesta Encantada for the last time and never came back. The castle was still unfinished. It would always be unfinished. He died in 1951 at the age of 88. And now we arrive at the twist. Because if this were the end of the story, it would be a simple one, a cautionary tale. Rich man overspends, rich man falls, the end. But that is not how the Hearst story goes. That is not why the name still means something today. Because at the very end of his life, the man who never once built a structure to hold his fortune together finally built one. In his will, William Randolph Hearst did the single wisest thing he ever did with money. He did not hand the empire to his 5 sons to split up between them. Think about why that matters. If he had simply divided the company 5 ways, and then each son had divided his share among his own children, within 2 or 3 generations, the whole thing would have been chopped into confetti. Everyone would own a sliver. No one would control anything. The heirs would have fought and sold, and the machine would have been carved up and sold for parts. That is how almost every great fortune in history has actually died. Hearst had watched himself nearly destroy the empire from the inside, so he locked it. He placed control of the company into a trust, and he built that trust with rules designed to survive his own family. Control would sit with a board of 13 trustees. Only 5 of those seats would ever go to members of the Hearst family. The other 8 would go to the executives who actually run the company, which means the family, on its own, can never command a majority. They cannot vote to sell. They cannot vote to split it up. They cannot cash out the company and divide the money. And to make sure no heir ever tried, he added one more clause, the kind lawyers call in terrorem. In terror, any Hearst who goes to court to challenge the trust is instantly and completely disinherited. Fight the structure, and you get nothing. Do you see what he did? He took the one thing that kills dynasties, the greed and the squabbling of the next generation, and he made it impossible. The family gets the dividends. The family gets to be rich, but the family does not get to touch the machine. He handed his descendants a golden goose and welded the cage shut. That is the piece almost every retelling misses. The castle was the mistake. The trust was the masterpiece. Now let me show you why that one decision mattered so much, by showing you the family that did not make it. There is an old American proverb about money. Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The first generation earns the fortune in its shirt sleeves working. The second generation spends it. And the third generation, having never learned to build anything, ends up right back in its shirt sleeves, broke. It happens so reliably that it is almost a law of nature. The Vanderbilts are the perfect example. When Cornelius Vanderbilt died in the 1870s, he was the richest man in America, richer, adjusted for the size of the economy, than almost anyone alive today. And what did his heirs do with it? They built. They built the most spectacular mansions this country has ever seen. A row of palaces on Fifth Avenue in New York, the Breakers in Newport, the Biltmore Estate in North Carolina, still the largest private home in America. Monuments, every one of them. But there was no lock, no trust holding the empire together, no rule against splitting it, no cage around the goose. So each generation took its share and built its palace, and the fortune divided and divided and divided again. Within about 3 generations of Cornelius, not a single Vanderbilt was among the richest people in America. The Fifth Avenue palaces were torn down. The great fortune, the largest in the country, was simply gone, spent on monuments by a family with nothing to hold it together. The Hearsts stood at the exact same cliff. William Randolph Hearst spent on monuments just as recklessly as any Vanderbilt heir. He nearly went over the edge. The difference, the only difference, was a piece of paper he signed near the end. The Vanderbilts kept building. The Hearsts built one last thing, and it was not a building. It was a wall around the money, which finally explains the castle. After Hearst died, the family was left holding La Cuesta Encantada, and they looked at it clearly, the way he never could. They saw it for what it truly was, a white elephant. 165 rooms that cost a staggering amount to heat, to guard, to repair, to insure, and that earned nothing. It was the same trap that had nearly killed the empire, and now it was sitting in the trust, waiting to drain it all over again. On top of that, the tax bill for holding an estate like that was crushing. So in 1957 and 58, the Hearst Corporation gave the castle away. They deeded La Cuesta Encantada and much of the priceless art still inside it to the people of the state of California. They gave it as a memorial in the name of Phoebe Apperson Hearst, the grandmother whose death had started the whole thing, and California turned it into a public monument. Read that again because it sounds like a loss, and it was actually a rescue. The family did not lose the castle. They let it go. On purpose. They cut loose the beautiful thing that only ate, so it could never again threaten the machine that actually paid. They kept the engine and gave away the monument. And here is the distilled truth of the whole story, the one line to carry out of this video. William Randolph Hearst nearly died rich in monuments and poor in structure. His family survived by doing the exact opposite. They let the palace go to keep the machine running. So look at where it left them. Today, the Hearst Corporation is one of the largest privately held companies in America. It is not a fading relic. In the last year, it pulled in a record $13.5 billion in revenue. It owns Fitch, one of the 3 great bond rating agencies that grade the debt of entire nations. It owns a stake in ESPN. It owns dozens of television stations, a stack of magazines you would recognize, and newspapers from San Francisco to Houston. And it is still, to this day, controlled by the trust William Randolph Hearst built in his will. The family still gets its dividends. No one has ever managed to pry the cage open. Even the land survived. The family never gave away the whole ranch. They kept around 82,000 acres of that original coastline, and in 2005, they struck a deal to protect it from development forever. The cattle still graze below the hill. The Hearst name is still on the land. So think back to where we started. A Hearst descendant standing in line, buying a ticket to walk through the front hall their family built. It sounds, at first, like the saddest image in the world. The heirs of a great empire, locked out of their own palace, tourists in their own history. But now you know better. That person in the ticket line is not the proof that the family failed. They are the proof that the plan worked. They are rich and secure, and their name still runs a $13 billion business, precisely because their ancestor was willing to give up the most beautiful thing he ever made. So let me ask you something, the same question the Hearsts had to answer. If someone handed you a palace for free, 165 rooms, a gold pool, the most famous house in the country, but keeping it would slowly bleed you dry, would you take it? Or would you have the nerve to give it away? Because that is the real lesson hiding inside the story of a castle on a hill. It was never about the size of the pile. The Vanderbilts had a bigger pile, and it vanished. It was never about the beauty of the monuments. Hearst had the most beautiful monuments in America, and they nearly ruined him. In the end, the only thing that decides whether a fortune lives or dies is whether someone had the discipline to build a structure to hold it, and the humility to let the pretty things go. The Hearsts let the castle go and kept the name. The Vanderbilts kept the mansions and lost everything. Which brings us to them. Because if you want to see the same story run all the way to the bottom, the version with no trust, no lock, and no rescue, then you need to hear how the richest family in American history managed to end up with descendants who died with almost nothing and mansions that were torn down for scrap. If you like this video, YouTube also thinks you're going to like this one on your screen.